So if you've not heard the news, cash ISAs are supposedly on the chopping block. This idea, it's been flown about for a good few years now, but more now than ever, it looks like action might be getting taken. And if true, it will end up being the single biggest change to the ISA regime since it was set up. So if you save into cash ISAs, be sure to stick around so that you fully understand the implications of these changes for you. I'll also look at a possible suggestion that's also been kind of, tossed about for the goal of getting more investment into UK companies. And I personally think it would be more fruitful than the current plans, but yeah, stick around to see what that's all about. My name's Ross Kelly, I'm a level 4 diploma holder in regulated financial planning, and if you want to be kept up to date with everything going on in the finance space, be sure to drop a subscribe so that you don't miss out on any of the news. And with that, what are these rumoured ISA changes? So to start with, ISAs, in case you didn't know, are a tax wrapper. They can basically put round things like cash and investments and allow it to grow and then eventually withdraw from it tax-free. The current limit for saving into ISAs is £20,000 per year. And this doesn't carry forward or anything like that. So you have each individual tax year to save in £20,000, and then the following year it resets. You can't catch up on anything you've missed. So with ISAs, not only do you not need to pay any tax on any income that's withdrawn from ISAs, but you also pay no tax on any of the growth. So that goes for capital gains and interest. You don't need to pay any tax on them at all. Now there are multiple types of ISAs. You've got cash ISAs, lifetime ISAs, stocks and shares ISAs. But for the sake of this video and the changes, we're going to be talking about the cash ISAs specifically. And as the name entails, cash ISAs are where you're putting money into your savings and it's held in cash, and then you're paid interest on the amount of money you have in the account. As such, it's easy just to think of them as another standard savings account that you would get at a bank, except this one has all the tax advantages. And it's this type of ISA specifically that Rachel Reeves has her eyes on. And the announcements for this will likely come out at the meeting on July 15th. The rumoured change to cash ISAs is that their annual allowance will be cut from 20k down to either 5 or maybe even 4k a year. It should be said that the total ISA limit will remain unchanged, so you'll still have the £20,000 a year limit. It's just that, like the lifetime ISA, you'll only be able to put in either 4 or 5,000 into cash ISAs every year, and then you'll need to make up the difference in other ISA accounts. If these changes do end up happening, it'll be arguably the single biggest change to the ISA regime since they started in 1999. So to make it a bit more clear what these changes would mean, it would mean that if you wanted to use your full £20,000 a year ISA allowance and you wanted to invest into cash ISAs, you'd only be able to put 4 or 5,000 into them. And then to use up the remainder of your ISA allowance, you would need to use other ISA wrappers such as the stocks and shares ISA to put the rest of the money into. An interesting point I thought about was that lifetime ISAs also have a limit of how much you can put into them. At the moment it's £4,000 every single year you can put into them. And as is, you can also currently put them into either cash or stocks and shares. So if this change were to come through that you could only put in 4,000 into cash ISAs, would that also include the lifetime ISA? I'd imagine it'll be brought up at the meeting with the specifics, but it might mean that you could put 4,000 in cash into a cash ISA, and then you could put 4,000 into cash into a lifetime ISA as well. So you'd be able to, effectively get 8,000 in cash. Or they might actually make it so that that wouldn't be possible. So if you were to put 4,000 cash into a cash ISA, when you invest into a lifetime ISA, you might not be able to put it in cash. You might have the only option of putting it into stocks and shares, or vice versa. But I would be surprised if they actually go through with that. Now, if you are currently saving into ISAs at all, then statistically this change will likely affect you. Looking at this chart from the .gov website, we can see that 12.4 million adult ISAs were subscribed to in the year 2022 to 2023. And of those millions, 63% of them were into cash. And the proportion of subscriptions going into cash ISAs actually increased compared to the previous year. So based on this data, why would the government want to make these changes? As clearly, it will affect a lot of UK savers. The reason Rachel Reeves is making these changes is because she wants more people investing into the stock market with their savings, specifically into UK companies. She wants this so that people who are saving can generate higher returns over the long term for their saving needs, as well as also putting more money into the UK economy to help businesses develop and grow. Now, on this idea, I can see both good and bad of it. So we'll cover both, and we'll start with what I think are, the good ideas when it comes to it. And the main point that I agree with is that more people really do need to be investing their savings, as opposed to just holding it in cash. The difference in your savings between these two methods of either cash or investing it, the difference can't be overstated. Looking at this graph from NatWest, we can see that the MSCI All Country Global Index, which is just a global index fund, clearly shows the real difference between investing into the stock market versus in cash over the long term. I mean, on this graph, it's the difference of literally hundreds of thousands of pounds. The idea of more people investing their savings will end up being a positive for both the people investing as well as the government. For individuals, it makes saving for retirement over the long term significantly easier if they're consistently investing it in these broad market indexes over a long term compared to just saving it in cash. And resultingly, if people have been investing more and as such having more money in retirement, it would make more people less reliant on the government to make it through retirement in a comfortable way. So stuff like state pension won't be as required to get by day. This point actually relates to why it's in the government's best interest as well for people to invest their savings, as it would mean that the government isn't as needed to support people in their retirement. It's no secret that for the coming decades, the state pension as is unsustainable. It already costs the government so much, and with the aging population, them costs are only going to increase as the time goes on. And as such, it's in the government's best interest to make it so as little people as possible are reliant to get by day in retirement from the state pension. And it means when the time comes that the government finally bites the bullet and makes changes to the state pension, it won't be as catastrophic for as many people. But ultimately, this lack of people investing their savings is a problem of the government's own design. It really does just come down to a real lack of education around investing across the whole population. Literally at all levels, from school pupils to retirees, not enough is taught about investing. For example, surveys show that the reason that people largely invest into cash ISAs is to avoid risk. A lot of people still think that investing into the stock market is basically equivalent to gambling, and that doing so, there's a real good chance of you just losing all of your money. The reality is, if you're investing into a broadly diversified global market index over the course of 40 or 50 years, going off of past data, you're more or less guaranteed to make more money from investing than if you were to just have held it in cash over that same time span. Now yes, there will be fluctuations in your savings when you're investing. It will go up and it will also go down, which won't really happen when you're investing in cash. And the thought of people losing their savings, looking at their bank accounts or their savings accounts and seeing a red number, it really can scare people. But again, ultimately, this just comes down to education. If people understood that volatility is just simply a feature of the market and it's guaranteed to happen, and that volatility is actually needed to help encourage that growth that they're looking for when investing. They just need to know to block out the noise of the market, of the news, all these people screaming disaster that the world's coming to an end. All they need to do is just continually invest into these global broad market, well-diversified indexes over the decades and just ignore what the news is saying. And by the end of it, they'll find themselves in a retirement that's way more comfortable than if they just held it in cash. It's common for even experts and academics to say that volatility is equal to risk. And while this is true for short-term trading, when we're talking about long-term, decade-long investing horizons, that's a pretty narrow and flawed way of defining risk. People investing in cash will largely avoid this volatility risk, but a much more real risk that they will end up falling into more times than not is the risk of not having enough money in retirement. Now, real quick before we move on to the problems with these announcements, and there are some real problems, I'd like to ask that if you found anything in this video useful or helpful, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. It really does help the channel out a lot. It's free and quick to do, and it really helps me keep bringing these financially informative videos to you. But with that, we'll now move on to some real problems that I think these cash ISA cuts will have. One of the most glaring problems is that if people want to hold their money in cash, they're going to just hold it in cash. It's unlikely that those who refuse to invest in the stock market will suddenly just start to do it once the cash ISA allowance has been cut. If their main reason for holding their savings in cash is to avoid a risk that they think is there, then they're going to continue to do so, even if it's less tax efficient. And as such, this money won't end up in the UK economy like Reeves want. It'll just end up in other high interest savings accounts in different banks. I think Martin Lewis put it best when he was also speaking about these proposed changes. This isn't nudge economics, this is just piss people off economics. And obviously, if these people are now saving their cash into non-tax-free wrappers, the government will be collecting more of a tax bill from them as well. For example, if you're a basic rate taxpayer, then you have £1,000 a year of tax-free interest savings that you can get. That means that, assuming your bank account has a 4% interest rate on it, once you've saved £25,000 into that account, the interest you'll begin to generate will be getting taxed. And again, this just comes back to education. If Reeves and the government really want people investing more into the UK market, they need to push out more education about the topic. This should be done at all levels, put into the school curriculum, as well as just a general push out into the public to let them know the benefits and the over-exaggerated dangers of investing into the broad market. As the current plan is, people will just continue to save their money in cash. It said now it'll be getting taxed as well, which is, it's just a real speed run to making it so that people hate you and your government even more. The other real glaring issue with this is that assuming that if people start investing into the stock market, that it's going to benefit the UK economy greatly. To get a rough idea of what percentage the UK is on the global equities market, we can just get a look at the FTSE All-World Index. And from that, we can see that UK equities are not even 4% of the global market. Compare that to the US, who make up 63% of it. So in reality, if people start doing what Reeves thinks they'll do when she makes these cuts, assuming that those people now start investing and they know that they're best served probably just investing into a broad global index fund, the majority of that money won't be going to UK companies. They'll be getting scraps, and the majority of it will be going to things like US companies. I refuse to believe that the government's stupid enough to not realise that this would be a real outcome, so I'd assume that it's going to be addressed at the July announcement when it happens. One idea I've heard being floated about that would actually address this issue directly is something what was kind of being coined as something like a UK ISA or a UK savings account. The best version of this idea that I've heard is that basically it would be an additional £4,000 a year you could save tax-free on top of your already existing £20,000 ISA allowance that you get. So if you were to use this in addition to your normal 20k limit, you'd have 24k you could save a year. However, this additional £4,000 a year that you would get has to be invested into UK equities. Now, I personally think that this is a much better idea than the current plan of just cutting the cash ISA limit. Introducing something like this UK ISA, as well as a big push for further education on investing, you know, like it's been mentioned several times in this video, I think would be a much better use of the government's resources and would end up in the long run being much better for everyone involved. The only real issue I've heard with something like the UK ISA is the logistics of implementing it. For example, if it was banks that were able to provide these things, how would the government make sure that each of these banks are actually investing that money into UK equities? And I think I've thought of a relatively good way of going about addressing this. Basically, it would be that the extra 4k allowance is something that's government issued, something like the NS&I bonds that are currently issued. Those NS&I bonds, by the way, I'm pretty sure they'll end up being the big winners if these cuts do end up going through. This is them due to being another tax efficient way to park cash. And while yes, they are technically bonds, for all intents and purposes, when it comes to volatility and security, they're effectively as safe as cash. So I wouldn't be surprised if a lot more people start investing into these if these cuts come through, which would actually be quite beneficial for the government because that money goes straight to them. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're very much aware of that likelihood. But yeah, the government could issue UK ISAs in a similar way that they issue these bonds. Maybe they could issue like 5 or 6 different indexes that they put together that range in different like cap sizes for the companies. So of the 5 or 6 selections, you might have something like a small cap index, mid cap, large cap, and then a couple indexes that are a blend of them as well. So you just go a similar purchasing process for the NS&I bonds, except you're doing it for the UK ISA, and you just simply say which of the indexes you'd like to buy into. And I mean, they're already trying to expand the .gov app, which is the app that contains all the government services. And as such, I think that would be like a pretty perfect tool for them to be able to make it so people can easily buy these indexes on a monthly or, you know, yearly basis. This app is being used to track all your government data and give you easy access to government resources. But I think it would be really easy to implement stuff like, say, purchasing stuff for a UK ISA or likely the NS&I bonds in the future as well, as it means it would be all online, linked up to all your other government stuff, and would be a very easy process for people to go through. But yeah, that's my Dragon's Den pitch done for the UK ISA. But I feel like it has to be a better idea than cutting the cash ISA. You can call me pessimistic, but I'm pretty sure that if these announcements go through as they've been rumoured to be, then it's just going to end up pissing a lot of people off. And the objectives that they're looking to achieve, they're not even going to come close to doing it. But who knows? This is all speculation and rumoured anyway. maybe after seeing this rather vocal backlash from industry experts, Reeves will maybe get cold feet and end up backing out of it and going back to the drawing board. So tell me what you think in the comments below. Do you think that this is a good idea? Do you think they'll end up going through with it? Or maybe even some better ideas that you think would be better served at achieving these objectives that the government's seems solely fixed on addressing? I'm curious to hear and see the discussions below, but do keep it civil. People are allowed to have different opinions and not necessarily any one of them is right. And yeah, if you've enjoyed the video, be sure to drop a like, and if you're enjoying the content, be sure to subscribe as well, as we'll have more content like this coming down the road. But with that, if you'd like to understand why £120,000 a year is the worst salary to earn in the UK, be sure to check out this video here where I explain why that's the case. And if not, until next time.